Okay, that sounds good. So let's go ahead and start. So welcome everyone, and I'm going to share my screen and do the welcome and see how things will go. No. Do you see anything?
Yes.
Yes.
What is it that you see?
UIA poster.
Okay, very good. So you see the entire presentation now?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Welcome everyone for our third international webinar. An hour is basically Architectural Education Commission of the UIA. So this seminar or webinar comes after our two successful ones. In June 2024, we had Architecture Education and the Role of the Architect in the 21st Century, Pedagogy, Practice, and Policy. And then that was followed by another one. The first one had 10 speakers, which was a very long marathon, I would say. In this one, we have, in the second one, we had Emerging Global Trends in Architecture Education, where we had 3 speakers talking about new European Bauhaus, decolonization, radical design, and many of these issues. Our focus in this webinar is on aligning architecture education across allied built environment disciplines. So we try to raise a number of questions and hopefully responses to these questions about how diverse but very much related built environment disciplines can work or hopefully work together to address the realities of a very challenging world. So we plan to have a documentation of this series, hopefully as white papers, summarizing the conversations, and this presentation is recorded for that purpose. So this will be presented also in the UIA Congress in Barcelona next year. So the alignment of architecture education across built environment disciplines is really based on an argument that we had and that was generated by colleagues in the UIA and definitely by IFLA and JALA, ISOCARP, and SHBNIM. Among ourselves, we had short meetings before, and then we tried to capture what is the key objective of this. So arguing that uniting and integrating disciplines doesn't dilute expertise, but it strengthens it, and trying to break the silos, encourage collaboration of disciplines. In trying to do this, we harness shared knowledge, collective innovation to design resilient environments. So that's the key argument of us, or of this webinar. We have 4 speakers, and beginning with Professor Jala Makhzoumi of American University of Beirut, who will share how her joint architecture and landscape architecture studios enrich student experience. Then this will be followed by Professor Shebnem Hoskara of Eastern Mediterranean University, which will build on some of the ideas through the lens of ISOCARP, transdisciplinary values, trying to demonstrate how urban planning and design can be integrated with architecture to foster inclusivity and future learning environment, future sustainable environment. Then this will be followed by Dr. Selma Harrington, who will then reflect on her postgraduate interior architecture program at Griffith College trying to show how assessment and curriculum strategies stretch boundaries between architecture, interior architecture and design. I will conclude the presentation. My name is Ashraf Salama, and I work as a professor of architecture and urbanism at University of Northumbria, Newcastle. I will conclude by presenting some early insights of a global survey of more than 350 schools of architecture. And this initiative is by the UIA and the Architectural Education Commission. So together, the 4 talks basically set the stage for the thrust of this webinar. An important thing as an introductory conceptualization, we know the challenge. We know that we are working in silos. And these silos are embedded in educational systems, in professional organizations, in accreditation limits, and also the presence of uneven resources that we can see across different disciplines. Some disciplines enjoy more resources than others. And the tension here is whether we want to go through disciplinary depth or interdisciplinary breadth. So that's the key issue. So we raise a number of questions, and you can see in the list here, significant number of questions really, which we find difficult to answer, and probably we will not be able to answer them all in this webinar, and hopefully they can encourage future dialogues on the same theme of alignment and webinars to be organized by ourselves and other organizations also. So I now invite our first speaker, Professor Jala Makhzoumi, to talk to us about expanding horizons, bridging disciplinary silos. From the perspective of design study teaching at the American University of Beirut. So please, Jala.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, good afternoon, all. It gives me great pleasure to take part in this webinar because it is the first concrete collaboration between UIA and IFLA and ISOCARP as well. So it's really lovely to see this initiative. And as we were speaking before we started, I'm sure the audience is also just as diverse. So I think it's a very good first step. Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to keep the presentation very simple and focus on my relationship, my experience at the American University of Beirut. But before, I would like to start by talking a little bit about landscape. Landscape architecture is a profession in flux. It is changing very fast. The change is due to scholarship across different disciplines outside of the field. For example, environmental and ecological sciences, landscape ecology. Ecology has taken landscape to create a new science of landscape ecology. In heritage, UNESCO's HUL, historic urban landscape methodology. Geographers probably are the greatest contributors to landscape. Again, they have contributed to landscape at the cultural dimension, and landscape is place. And of course, human rights, citizenship, and democracy, in which I have participated. Why? Because landscape is context specific and because landscape contextualizes the problematic. So for all of these fields, this is why they use landscape. So, but in turn, scholarship across disciplines has enriched theory and practice in landscape architecture to the extent that the International Federation of Landscape Architecture has asked that the definition of the profession is changed in the ILO, the International Labour Organization. And you can see here from the collaborations of IFLA, again with the sciences, biodiversity, with UNESCO and heritage, and with ISOCARP and UIA and World Health Organization, that it is really it has stretched the boundaries of landscape practice. So landscape has changed. Architecture has changed, of course. I'm not going to go into all of the changes, but I've selected two. One of them is the sociospatial practices and methods in architecture, and the other, more relevant at least to the collaboration I will discuss, is energy efficiency and climate. And I was in the UIA forum in Kuala Lumpur last November, and I could see so many presentations were focusing on zero carbon and on climate change in building systems. The world has also changed greatly in this in the last 20 years. I mean, the ecosphere is now in a critical condition, and which is warranting that we all, in all our professions, address, but we can only address collectively. And I think one of the best examples of such collaboration to tackle the changing world climate and ecology is the Sustainable Development Goals. Something else is happening, and I wanted to share the way I see it in the model. What is the role of designers in this global change? I think there's a very big shift from state-led global treaties in addressing environmental changes. And you see here, it's very much top-heavy. It filters to environment is a resource we need, air, water. It filters to people, and the designer has a minor role or no role at all. In the new model, people are mobilizing the world over for the environment, because environment is not just resources. It's about heritage, livelihoods, and identity. And so this new dynamic creates a new role for designers, whether they're architects, planners, or landscape architects, to mediate and facilitate between agencies and between government and between local communities. So this is really a war. And this, again, will require this kind of cross-disciplinary participation. What about academic institutions? Are they changing? Now, seeing that both professions are changing, I don't know whether they are, but I will draw on my experience in AUB across about 15 years or more, 20 years. So the American University of Beirut is really a very special place, and because the campus, it is a proper campus, which even facilitates more this kind of collaboration. The first experiment I did was soon after I was appointed to the landscape program, to take charge of the landscape architecture program at the American University of Beirut, was to try to see whether we can come together as architects and landscape architects to work together and to collaborate. And you can see that the landscape, it was then a landscape design and ecosystem management, the BS, the degree, and it is in the agriculture and food science faculty, and the architecture is in the engineering and architecture faculty. And what we brought together ecological landscape design third-year students, third and fourth-year students in architecture. I led the landscape. I was teaching there, and my co-teacher in architecture was Abdel Halim Jabr. And we both believed in this cross-disciplinary collaboration. So the undergraduate, we called it Parallel Studio because of to meet the challenges. So why? The starting premise was that interdisciplinary design teaching is an approach that engenders holistic, creative, and long-term thinking rather than short-term. First-hand experience in design studios is the best way to demonstrate not only the benefits, but the challenges. What were the challenges? So the first was administrative. And we realized very early on that because of the administrative bureaucracy, the academic bureaucracy, securing approvals was going to take months, if at all we get the approval. So we decided to bypass that. And what we did is that 2 courses were planned in their respective faculties, but in fact combining enrolled students in the faculties to work together through 2 weekly sessions. The course syllabus was conceptualized and written jointly by myself and Abdul Halim. Grading was also done jointly, but the grades were uploaded to 2 different courses. So in a sense, we cheated the system to do this studio, and it worked. The second challenge was perceptions. Landscape architecture is well known, it's well established throughout the Middle East. The American University has one of the top ranking architecture programs, and the students are quite full of themselves and happy with themselves. So in contrast, landscape is very new. It is in the Faculty of Agriculture. It was really associated with gardening. So what happened is that it was important to try to overcome this derogatory perception among mainly architecture students. So once the interdepartmental course structure was announced, many asked to withdraw from the course. The first session, many said, we don't want to be. Well, who are these? Why are they with us in this course? Refusing the idea of a joint studio. Eventually, however, most stayed on. They came back to us saying, why didn't we have such arrangements later on? So it must have been as fulfilling and rewarding to the architects as it was to us as teachers and to the landscape architects. What had been planned really, also important here, is choice of the project. The project we chose is the Beirut River. You can see it, and it is a very, very challenging project because it goes through completely industrial, the estuary, urbanized, and then semi-rural, and then completely natural. So we had the student working groups, working both, and then they paired to tackle one of many projects. What we planned, there was a jury bazaar, and then what was planned as an interdepartmental, interdisciplinary design studio was much more. The hybridity of the solutions offered were really transdisciplinary, and it's something I remember. This was in 2003 when the landscape program was established at the American University of Beirut. The second level of collaboration is with the master's degree in urban planning, but more specifically in urban design, also offered by the School of Architecture. And it is a program, an MS program of 2 years, open to students with design basis, so architects and landscape architects. Here, the crossing the disciplines was done in 2 ways. One, slowly, it started by supervising, having faculty from landscape supervise or co-supervise thesis, research thesis. And here, for example, the ecological landscape design was applied to several of these thesis subjects, which range from communal lands, rural communal lands, to urban sustainability and resilience, to mountain resorts. So it's a very wide range. And the landscape methodology was beneficial because it, as I said, it skips scales. It looks at a flow between the local and the regional and even global. And because it is holistic, integrating both nature and environment and people and culture. Another level of collaboration was through a joint studio. Oh, before I forget, one of the outcomes has been, because over the years, this collaboration with landscape has been unanimous approval to change the name of the master's degree to Master of Landscape and Urban Design, which was approved by the faculty and is now pending approval by the ministry because it's because of the degree. So it shows that there is some progress on the academic level. The last example is really in the design studio. It's a joint studio that I co-taught with Professor Huwaid Al-Harithi. And it's really the methodology I read from the syllabus. Design is approached as a process of inquiry, as an inter and transdisciplinary method of urban intervention. Again, you see the urban pops up. So really, this overlap between landscape architecture and urban design is very much part of this studio and the program, really. The studio, therefore, approaches the urban design process as discursive and grounded in scenario-based methods that are backed up by rigorous research, analysis, interpretation, to propose strategic design interventions that recognize ecological, environmental, social, economic, cultural, political layers of the city, also heritage, which is not mentioned here, as a whole, and as to the specific neighborhood. The neighborhood we worked in was a post-disaster recovery. A part of, if you heard of the Beirut explosion in Beirut in 2020, on August 4th, this is a site, Karantina, the neighborhood very close to the harbor where the explosion happened. And so it is part of an ongoing project by the Beirut Urban Lab, also in AUB. And so the students work together to look at the different layers, the political, the community, and the natural, the ecological. And then they worked at different nodes that they created as independent projects, because in the end, each student has to have their design. So it was, again, quite successful. And these are images from the jury. And these are the learning outcomes from the studio. And I will read the last one, namely to apply design research and thinking to the design of public spaces from an interdisciplinary design frame towards an environmentally and culturally sound, sustainable and green design intervention. So I conclude with this very simple image that I put together from those experiences. So there are really so many commonalities and complementarities, and discovering each one of these is as rewarding to the students as informative as it is to the faculty. So one of the questions that Ashraf has raised was, I mean, what is in it for the faculty member? Because it's extra work to coordinate and to do. And this is really one of the rewards. It's incredibly very innovative, and all sorts of solutions come out and questions are raised, the challenges, and it prepares them for real life scenarios that they will be working on. So the commonalities between, I've listed architecture and landscape architecture, but in fact, it's the same with urban design. The medium is space in all three professions. We work with space. In architecture, it's more built and urban. In landscape architecture, that is the advantages. It is unbounded. It flows across the urban, suburban, rural, and regional. The tool is design. This is our skill in all three professions. And so in architecture, the focus is much more sociocultural. And in urban design, I think infrastructure comes very much into the picture. And in landscape, it's very much ecological and cultural processes. We manage, we don't always design. Management is an important part of design. So this is really another aspect of the landscape. And finally, the aim, again, it's community well-being and environmental health and resilience. So this is approached in architecture by building systems that are, sustainable in economically, socially, culturally meaningful, and building systems that are environmentally sustainable. And in landscape, it is also regenerative ecosystems, whether they are urban, or rural or in between. So that is all I wanted to share with you, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Jada. This is very insightful, and we can go now to the second speaker, Professor Shabnam Hoskra. So Shabnam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I believe you see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here I go. I don't see any of you, but I believe you are there. Well, good afternoon. I'm very well. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Ashraf Salama and Selma Harrington for the invitation. I'm very pleased to represent ISOCARP today in discussing how we can better align architectural education with planning and urban design through a transdisciplinary approach. And I cannot agree more with Professor Yala. Thanks for sharing your precise, experiences, because what I will be talking about is very much kind of complementing what you have already mentioned. I will try to or talk in my presentation, try to explore the integration of planning, urban design, and architecture into architectural education, with the argument that this leads to transdisciplinarity, or to put it in other words, transdisciplinary approaches in architectural education required in contemporary world necessitates this type of integration. And I put engineering plus because I will mainly concentrate on planning and urban design, but this doesn't ignore all the other disciplines, starting from engineering, landscape architecture, environmental sciences, etc., which I will mention in a minute. Well, realistically, the built environment disciplines, if we may call them, do not manifest independently in the world, in real world, and in education as well. They overlap, they interpolate, they interplay with each other wherever any of them exist. So the most, the common related ones are to architecture, are urban planning, urban design, and landscape architecture, in addition to many other disciplines. And this is particularly true in cities where like more than 60% by 2030 will be of the population will be living, working, and playing in cities, and where urban density will necessitate some adjacency. So in the context of my discussion, I will try to explore how we can break these disciplinary compartments or silos, as Professor Salama mentioned, while preserving what makes architectural education unique, and utilizing the studio teaching as a powerful tool for change. Well, obviously, I'm an architect with a strong background of urban design and urban planning or urbanism. Therefore, my perspective to architectural education is, you may call it, from an urban designer's perspective, if not a direct planner's perspective. So I strongly believe that architects should have an urban mind in order to address the contemporary urban challenges. We should be able to educate the future architects as urban-minded professionals, or as it is said under the umbrella of ISOCARP in one of the traditional events, or as urban thinkers, so that they can understand or address not only the environmental problems, but also the social, cultural, and the economic ones. Well, architecture is not about designing or constructing buildings and spaces only today, in today's very complex, challenging world. If we try to remember the main challenges of today, under urbanization, climate change, etc., let's think about the role of architects and architecture-related disciplines. What is our role, and how we can address these, or how we should address these challenges? For example, can we be in a position to ignore urbanization problems while we are designing, or while we are planning? Or can we, or can our newly designed buildings or any constructional activities ignore the possible climate hazards caused by climate change or climate crisis? How should we react as architects, planners, urban designers to the problems caused by immigration in our cities? Can we ignore poverty and hunger while designing new environments, especially residential neighborhoods? Don't we have any responsibilities for the reconstruction of our cities after any wars caused by humans? And when we take these responsibilities for reconstruction, shouldn't we think about people, the citizens, the owners of these destroyed places during the reconstruction processes? And can we turn our backs on social inequalities and violence in our cities, especially towards women or any vulnerable communities? So, can architecture keep itself away from all these issues? Well, if our answer is no to this question, then some other questions arise, as they were asked at the introduction of this webinar. Can we not consider any of the issues defined by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which have been on our agenda since 2016? Can we ignore the 5 P's: people, planet, prosperity, partnership, and peace when we perform our professions? Or how can we relate all these P's in our design actions or design processes? What kind of futures are we seeking in our cities? Obviously sustainable, resilient, livable. And on our agenda, we have many concepts in our design studios, architectural design studios, planning studios, urban design studios, landscape architecture. We talk about many different terminologies, ranging from eco cities to self-sufficient cities, energy efficient cities, sponge cities, etc. So, considering all these questions, the most crucial question that we should ask in terms of architectural education is, how can we educate, or how should we educate future architects to address the global challenges while designing within their local environments? This is how I, after some years of experience in architectural education, this is what I am questioning all the time in my courses and in my design studios. So at this point, I believe we must urgently consider integrating all other disciplines into architectural education. Again, here I refer planning, urban design, and engineering very briefly, but it covers all the other disciplines, not only space or place-related disciplines, but all other disciplines, basically, depending on the core problem that we are facing with. The challenges of our cities face cannot be solved within the disciplinary boundaries. This is how we believe. Disciplinary separations really hinder the real world experiences or relevance. Climate change, inequalities, all the challenges that I have mentioned require cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary responses. So the built environment disciplines should continuously evolve to meet the needs of the current issues and upcoming trends. So in that perspective, the students need to work through disciplinary thinking, transdisciplinary thinking. Students must be prepared to work collaboratively across sectors and disciplines. And I think in the previous talk, we have seen very, strong examples of how we can experience this collaborative working. And students need exposure to urban decision making. So here our keyword, as was indicated in the title of my talk, is transdisciplinarity, which is a mode of inquiry or research which transcends the traditional disciplinary boundaries by integrating and synthesizing knowledge from multiple academic fields or even non-academic fields. So in that sense, transdisciplinarity seeks not only integration, but also co-creation of knowledge among academic fields, practitioners, non-academic sectors, as I said, including community stakeholders, policymakers, and natural environments itself. And transdisciplinary teaching or pedagogy, it's not just a pedagogical choice, it shouldn't be, but it requires institutional backing and cultural shifts within the departments. And yes, it needs more work. It needs a more leadership vision. It needs many new steps, or maybe different steps than the traditional steps that we have been taking in our learning environments. Joint and common studios, seminars, group works, parallel studios, or peer working with other students. So all these has to be envisioned. We need a visionary approach for these, and our institutions should should give us backups in these. So in the context of architectural education, transdisciplinarity encourages collaboration among disciplines, and it fosters innovation through the co-creation of knowledge, as I said. Well, I would say that, again, transdisciplinarity in this context is not only a methodological stance, but also an ontological and an epistemological commitment. And it lies, well, the design in that sense lies between governments, culture, and ecology, if we take it further. So in this way of looking, studio is always as we have to take the studio as a common ground. In the studio, we need to deal with real world problems. We have to consider the planning tools. We need to consider the topics, theories, data, processes, methodologies, policies taken from planning, taken from urban design, taken from landscape architecture, all necessary disciplines. And we need to apply them in the studio with peer-to-peer or community-driven inquiry methods. And we have to look at it from a kind of super complexity perspective, I would say. So in this way of learning environments, if we call it transdisciplinary learning, the students will be gaining different abilities like system thinking, negotiations, mediations. We will be talking about spatial justice, civic engagement, etc. So beyond the design skills, the students will develop a mindset that prepares them for the social, political, and environmental context of practice. This kind of pedagogical shift will mirror the real-world practices, preparing students for collaborative projects, collaborative urban governance, co-designing, long-term and urban stewardship, and integrated project delivery at the same time. How we do this? We already talked about it a little bit. We need really educational models that enable the students to become co-authors of the urban solutions or co-authors of the urban problems. They have to first understand or even define the problems. They have to be working within and beyond their own disciplines. They have to bridge the compartments or silos without erasing their own discipline identities. And the studio should be an incubator for such an integrated urban understanding. And I totally believe, as I said, being an architect, being in ISOCAR for a couple of years, I think the approach of the society, International Society of City and Regional Planners, can be taken as a model for urban education, or for urban education in architecture or in other disciplines, or for even architecture education. In that sense, the studio needs to be a flexible and innovative learning environment. So we have to consider our educational pedagogy. It should be shifted from the conventional classroom models and teacher-centered approaches to some real world problem focused projects where the student, instructor in the architectural studio, the architect, and other disciplines, supported by professionals, students from other programs as peers, by workshops, by informal meetings, by different types of trainings, then the current learners can feel welcome, encouraged, and easily enable this type of environments in the architectural education. Here, I think we really need to understand or rethink the core competencies of an architect. An architect should understand the concepts of sustainability and resiliency, economical, ecological, social, cultural, and political dimensions at all scales. An architect should have a systematic understanding of the cities. That's why I say an urban-minded, an urban thinker, an architect as an urban thinker. A systematic approach to urban problems. We need to have a systematic approach. Obviously, circularity, adaptability, resilience should be in the core of architecture. And we need constant collaboration, research, teaching, and practice. It is compulsory in our agenda. So again, ISOCARP, I believe, sets up a very good model in terms of collaboration, equity, and resilience, bringing different disciplines together. Since 1965, our society, having individual and institutional members from more than 90 countries, we works with a vision to make the cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable through integrative participatory approaches, urban approaches, architecture approaches, planning approaches, etc. So ISOCARP believes we shape the cities and the cities shape us. We keep saying this in several meetings with our colleagues in the society. We try to bring theory and practice across the borders and disciplines. So in our society, there are people, scholars, professionals, academics from very different disciplines, and we work together and we support each other and we produce together. I think this model is a very good model that can be applied in our architectural education systems. There is one specific information about what the society does is the Young Planning Professionals Program, which is directly I would say a training program through the workshops, internships, creating young professional networks, publications, awards, etc. So I believe the future success in the built environment professions and the implementation of sustainable urban strategies rely on people who are trained in such an open-minded, in such a diverse or transdisciplinary way, so that they all become problem solvers, they all become strategic decision makers, and they all become talented collaborators who are capable of facilitating both interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary synergies. Yeah, I will stop here. I believe humanity is present and future is urban. I believe we all agree with that. Now it is time to rethink, research, and act urban in all fields related with space, place, or not. And we need to do it through co-creation, collaboration, and communication, leaving no one behind. So I will stop here. Thank you
Okay.
so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Shabnam. That was also thought-provoking and generating loads of questions, very important questions. Now I turn to our third speaker, Dr. Selma Harrington, who will be talking about designing inside out and the relationship between architecture and interior design / architecture. And I have to say that Selma and I are the co-directors of the Architectural Education Commission. We have been working on the commission over the past 2 years, and we have generated a number of activities, really, and we hope to be able to communicate these activities in a nutshell. So without saying much, please, Selma.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. Let me just set up here and can you see? Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and great to join this warm and exuberant Mediterranean contingent from this end. I'm speaking in Sarajevo, but I'm normally based in Dublin, so I'm Irish and Bosnian architect. So let me share, continuing on, let me share a few of my musings. Now, I don't see my slides moving. Oh, there, okay. So let me share some of my musings on the topics. We have set an ambitious task, and I welcome this sort of initiative to talk between representatives of different professional institutions articulating disciplinary matters. So that will help us kind of share our terminology and create a common glossary, because I think when we talk about spatial design, we usually mean architecture or environments, even though spatial design can also be an object designed by a product designer, or as well as large space designed by a landscape architect or urban designer. So our language could be ambiguous, particularly in the encounter with regulators and other professions, as well as clients. We have also become somewhat removed as professionals from engineers and disciplines that help ideas to materialize in space. So perhaps the most critical elements which need to be understood well are mobility and pace of change that we are all experiencing. So if we are to understand spatial needs, spatial experience, spatial design, and necessary skills and competencies for future designers and architects, we need to have that in mind: pace of change and mobility, because that shapes us. Ashraf has broadly framed our discussions today with the challenges of climate change, social inequities, evolving urban landscapes, and I'll try to put back my interior architecture thinking hat. I just need to clarify, I am a trained architect, a PhD in architecture with various roles and experiences, but I'll try to put the hat back. And so what immediately comes to mind, trying to zoom in and out, there is an enormous stretch between what's happening in different parts between the notion of inside-out architecture from exterior and interior space, going from intimate and private to almost extraterrestrial, Moon and Mars, etc. So we typically understand and use the analogy thinking inside the box to relate to architectural interiors, while thinking outside of the box can relate to architectural object, a structure, a building, and that can then shift and radiate further in space towards urban design. So for our discussion today, I would, look at the smaller scale in contrast to previous speakers, but I would try to put some notions on boundaries and synergies between architecture, interior architecture, and design as practiced and as experienced. So there are a few threads that I've listed here that I would like to follow as a selected trajectory of my own being a designer at times, interior architect, educator, and a lot of time an advocate for creative and cultural professions through professional bodies. So my alma mater here in Sarajevo, School of Architecture and Urbanism, celebrated last year 75 years of existence. It produced generalists, mainly architects, and with the title of engineer of architecture, equipped to join workforce in public sector and work as and small scale private sector at the time, and work as designers, urban planners, facility managers, administrators, etc. So the study of interior architecture, product design, graphic design only became available in the 1980s in my hometown, and in Ireland, where I live for over 30 years now, even later. So initially working with complex industries in Bosnia, I was, as I mentioned at the time, a product designer, a street furniture designer, applied researcher, or I was designing within existing and historic structures and sites, and indeed new build. So that sort of transversability came as the result of availability of work and opportunities, but also the training obviously enabled such an approach. Later on, when I worked in Africa, in Zimbabwe, my work transformed since the 1990s, but also through work with local industries. Zimbabwe at the time was just recovering from battle for independence in the 1980s and became a part of a non-aligned world. There was no indigenous school of architecture at the time, and there was the first Graphic Designers Association formed with the help of the EU funding to support local export. So generally speaking, in the context of that region, the climate challenges and shortages of all sorts were matched by structural reforms, foreign investments, and imported solutions, coupled with local ingenuity, resourcefulness, resilience, and kindness. Development funding also supported, for example, training facilities for war veterans, tourism and hospitality, in parallel to banking and public offices, where the refurbishments were, predominant type of work, all happening amidst a stunning natural landscape, strong sunlight, bright daylight, our architectural basic tools, with natural affinity for color, which inspired generous and colorful interiors. Returning to Ireland in the late 1990s, my portfolio looked alien to a typical architectural practice, whose clients were a mixture of religious authorities, educational institutions, residential developments from larger to smaller apartment buildings were only commencing to be built versus the private dwellings, and various commercial developments. So the economic boom in Ireland, dubbed as the Celtic Tiger in the early 2000s, changed all that landscape, and that brought in initially show houses and an economy of desire, so that the interior design and architecture became almost a glamorous new niche profession, which also sparked the creation of new educational programs. So there could be a fuller and deeper case study made from a successful private college, Griffith College, where I worked for a long time in different capacity. The college at the time when the Celtic Tiger was beginning to emerge first bought a small program developed by an architect. That was a program of interior design, which was validated by a somewhat obscure UK-based private validations RODEX scheme. This has gradually and later developed in a refined product with several strands and options, full-time, part-time, that reflected the evolving local need, but also the college's international ambitions. So the college was pushing the boundaries of educational market, international educational market. The college continues to expand and adapt to currently to capture the market segments and attract international students, but that is primarily in information technology, accounting, business, gaming, legal studies, so that architecture and design courses are seen as secondary areas of development at the moment. So what is also interesting for the Irish interior architecture and design context? Firstly, the typical urban built environment in Ireland has been developed largely as a colonial project, culminating in fine Georgian and Victorian ensembles and buildings in many places. This building stock is still very much in use by and owned by a variety of owners and occupiers. And that combined with the repurposing, retrofitting, and reuse drive in the EU is matched with the environmental regulation at the level of the country. So this matrix of parameters has created a need for new specialist knowledge, particularly when maintaining and renovating this large building stock. And that informed the development of these undergraduate and postgraduate courses that I mentioned that are happening in few other schools as well. So that's how interior design and later on interior architecture developed first at undergraduate and then at postgraduate master level. So this Irish experience of complex heritage and evolving attitudes, societal and economical attitudes, resulted in a rather conservative approach to profession, but in a positive way, in as much as respect of existing structure became more prominent. But also there is quite an innovative way of applying conservation principles using the so-called reversibility, which is known term in the hardcore conservation when we're working with heritage buildings. So while inserting new functions, the respect is shown by allowing the new functions to be reversed if there is such a requirement. So for example, I'm showing here a well-known, the work of well-known practice McCallum Malvin architects from Dublin, who have very successfully converted a decommissioned church in a place 1 hour outside of Dublin and practically inserted a very nice public and very useful public library in that place. So it's a sort of societal as well as architectural study that can be made out of this. This type of case studies were very much prominent in the course that I was teaching, helping to initiate and develop research and develop focus on constructive alignment between different teaching models, shaping them, giving them adequate content and corresponding assessment strategies. During the 3-semester master program, which I taught over some 5 or 7 years in Griffith College, A central part, as Shebnem was mentioning, involved design studio, which comprised of group and individual projects with different methods of self-assessment, self-reflection, journals, live crits, workshops, studio trips. The projects were delivered through conventional means, including model making, sketching, drawing, use of computer workshops, visualizations, combined with building information modeling and use of specialized software, which then culminated in thesis by practice dissertation, and which was also along the course scrutinized through standalone module of business studies and professional practice assignments. In parallel to this teaching work, I have been involved first at the national level with professional bodies in this relation with the Institute of Designers, which then brought me in contact and delegated me to participate in the work of emerging European Council for Interior Architects, ECIA, where I served for 4 years in the past as a Secretary General. So the ECIA is a very active small body comprising, I think, currently some 15 European countries who are active today, and largely depending on a group of dedicated volunteers who are interested in developing a profession and its standards and engaging in a dialogue with the EU with view of professional recognition. Because I need to stress that architecture in the EU level, EU 27, is regulated, is sort of under the scrutiny of Professional Qualifications Directive, which impacts on the licensing of architects, on recognition of school educational programs, and shaping the content of the curricula. The ECIA collaborates also with the World Body. I'm only giving a snapshot here of a web page from IFI, International Federation of Interior Architects. Again, a global body, which I don't have a fresh insight into, but I think it's worthy of mapping it at this level with sister or allied professions, as they also have a vision and view of their role as shaping standards and profile of interior architects and designers. And lastly, but not leastly, let me migrate back to Ireland and just show briefly the process of collaboration between 6 schools of architecture, which is conducted under the auspices of Professional Institute, Royal Institute of Architects in Ireland, which is also verifying adherence to this through continual professional development scheme. It is verifying the adherence to so-called 11 points of common standards, which is prescribed by the EU legislation in this Professional Qualifications Directive. So the 6 schools have got together and thrashed out their current work and curricula to kind of see and pool the common learning areas which allow enough flexibility and scope to individual schools to customize and adapt their own programs within geographic locations in Ireland and within demographics of their students. So these 5 learning strands are design, climate, ethics, communication, and technology. And they are also sort of mapped or mimicking in a way the design process, because Irish education is very much collaborating with practices. We are a small country, we can do that. So I believe that looking at this type of mapping, finding, or going back perhaps to common grounds that all our allied disciplines maybe once had arising from architectural thinking, going back to these fundamental principles might help find common ground for skills and foundational skills and competencies, out of which it is possible to fan out specialist knowledge for a varied disciplinary profile of each specific design branch. So by way of just concluding or working towards some sort of recommendations, I think from certainly Irish perspective, but also very much, I think, European perspective, the interior architecture and design are transiting in a way into existing building fabric and conservation field led by sustainability, led by, this links very much with what Shebnem's, a few of her slides were showing, but in this area, we are kind of reflecting the jargon of triple or quadruple helix, which is connecting different areas, breaking silos and putting them back into practices. I think we already have that trend spotted on the ground in education as well, let alone with the appearance and the launch of the new European Bauhaus, which came from above, from European Union, but which calls on us to sort of look at transdisciplinarity, co-creation, collaboration, and multi-level engagement. So the second point, perhaps in mapping the curricula or mapping the basics, is that the business studies, as well as elements of professional practice, elements of understanding how do design teams work, how is the collaboration happening on the construction project, real life situation, we might better fan out the specifics and specialisms that each of the disciplines brings to the field. So with that, I will conclude, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Salma. So that's another perspective. So we have really the three perspectives. Of course, we would have liked to see some engineering disciplines joining us who collaborate with architecture and landscape architecture and urban design and interior architecture. So probably I will try to touch on this a little bit. So I'll share my presentation now. Yes, okay. So do you see my presentation? Hello? Yes?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Okay.
yes, we do.
Excellent, excellent. Because I have two screens and I don't know which one is showing. So,
We
so
see all
now,
the posters.
excellent. Okay. So now that we've listened to the three distinguished colleagues and their presentations, this is the fourth one, which I present to capture the status of collaboration and or integration of allied built environment disciplines across the world, and this is through the survey. So the title here is about an engaged architecture education across built environment disciplines and initial insights from a global survey. So, of course, I don't want to just go directly to the survey because the survey is in progress and was not presented to the UIA yet. So I'm just going to show some glimpses of that. So I will start by some provocations, then try to respond to the question of why do we need integration or to integrate with other disciplines as architects, and why this is now urgent. Then show relevant outcomes from the global survey of over 350, and actually there are 345 schools of architecture. So the first provocation is basically architecture is no longer enough. And we can see that if we try to capture what's going on in practice and how a project starts. In the past, it used to start from the architect or by the architect. Now it starts not necessarily by the architect. It could start with a project manager, with somebody else, maybe with a construction company. So the architect became a team player than that idea of a team leader. So in this, I should say that designing buildings without understanding the systems within which they exist is like composing music for instruments you've never heard and probably you wouldn't like to hear. So architecture alone cannot respond to the urgent challenges of today, whether environmental, social, technological, and allied disciplines help to bring specialized knowledge that expands the capacity of architecture to engage with real world complexity. So the second one here is that design intelligence, and intelligence here refers to knowledge and practice, is shared, not owned. The best ideas often emerge in the space between disciplines, not within a discipline. And we can see, of course, how interior designers, urban designers, landscape architects would contribute to that. Interior designers contribute to care about sensory intimacy. Urban designers remind us of the notion of flows. Landscape architects emphasize engagement, emphasize engagement with nature, engagement with users and communities. So these ways of thinking enrich architecture beyond its conventional scope. So simply, the scope of architecture is expanding to include other areas. One important thing which I keep saying before I get to that third one, I keep saying the idea that architecture doesn't have its own knowledge base. It doesn't exist. It's not like physics. It's not like chemistry. It's not like other disciplines. So architecture is by default interdisciplinary. But the problem comes with not necessarily transdisciplinarity. It comes with transdisciplinary action. Once architects are in charge of a project, they say, you always hear this. This is how we do it. We don't do it this way. Once you say that, you establish boundaries for telling others that, no, if you want to collaborate, you collaborate on my terms, not on a shared term. So that's an important point. So collaboration begins when architecture gives up its need or attitude to control everything, and bringing in allied disciplines unsettles architecture. Comfort zone or long-standing authoritative position replaces it with dialogic, negotiated practice. So that's one of the provocations. The third one is about transdisciplinarity. I have to say that I have been writing about transdisciplinarity, probably since 2002, trying to imagine design studios that involve collaboration with civil engineers, landscape architects, and urban planners, and even environmental psychologists. So the future, there is no doubt, is transdisciplinary by design. Here I would argue that real innovation lies in education that tries to model how different disciplines think, feel, act, and can work together. So that's another provocation. Then now is the question of why, and why now? So what is the urgency, really? When we talk about now, of course, we've seen in Shabnam slides that there is urgency. whether issues related to migration, climate change, inequalities. And as I say, we face complex global challenges: climate change, urban inequality, escalating health crisis that simply cannot be solved in isolation. We had a global incident, which is the COVID, and I think COVID enabled an opportunity to start to collaborate with other disciplines, to start to see the value of public health professionals, for example. This did not exist pre-COVID. So still, our traditional architecture education tends to silo knowledge, even though real-world problems are deeply interconnected and relate to many other disciplines. It's not an architecture problem. There is no architecture problem. There are other problems that an architect should be able to contribute to. So basically, the design professions now demand a new way of working, collaborative, cross-disciplinary practice, where teams share platforms, different digital platforms, respect diverse value systems. Students are starting to recognize this shift, especially advanced students. They are looking for flexible, purpose-driven, transdisciplinary learning pathways that prepare them to contribute to shaping the future of built environment. We have recently conducted the UIA, I would call it, it's not called yet, but doesn't have a name, but we call it Global Survey of Architecture Schools. For the purpose of this conversation and this talk, it's the UIA Global Survey of more than 350 schools of architecture. The UIA supported this study, sponsored this study by the appointment of a researcher who is working with us. And the results of the survey will be presented to the UIA Council briefly next week. So I won't go through the details of the survey as it goes beyond really the scope of this discussion. We had a very sophisticated strategy to select the 350 schools, and also another strategy for analyzing what we gathered. So the analysis of the relevant specifics reveals a number of areas, seven key collaborative models that bridge disciplines in architecture education. How do we bridge knowledge and disciplines in architecture education? So joint degrees, interdisciplinary research centers, cross-department lecture series. Of course, there are levels of integration. Shared fabrication lab, shared urban labs, co-taught studios, as we have seen the experience of Jala, joint field projects, integrated elective courses or modules. These are many levels that we see today trying to achieve alignment of architecture education to other areas of education, and mainly built environment education disciplines. Here you can see the number of schools that collaborate or have a component that engages with other disciplines. And here, other disciplines expanded beyond landscape architecture, urban design and planning, and interior architecture. So I'm referring here to other areas also. And the number of schools in each of the UIA region. The survey was classified based on region 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm assuming you know the regions. Region 1 is Western Europe. Region 2 is Eastern Europe and North Africa. Region 3 is Americas, North America and South America. Region 4 is China, Asia, and Australia. And then region 5 is Africa. Across the 345 school sample, we found that 16.2% offer joint degrees with engineering. Only 1% collaborate with business schools. 7.5% integrate coursework with computer science. 2.6% conduct interdisciplinary research with social sciences. 5% co-teach modules with environmental sciences. 10% host allied disciplines guest lecture series. 9% provide dual degrees and pairing architecture with another field. So these are some of the preliminary results. Of course, the percentages are very low, and they warrant this conversation and this webinar. The survey also maps 7 types of architecture joint degrees worldwide, in most cases led by architecture and design programs. So we find that there were 12 to 13 or 13 offerings in regions 1 and 3 in Europe and Americas across 40 plus countries. Strong architecture and planning ties concentrated in region 4, and that is China, Asia, and Australia. Lesser but growing collaborations include architecture and engineering in region 1, Europe, Western Europe, and region 5, Africa. Environmental design and interior design also are witnessed in terms of integration in these 2 regions. Architecture crossover with landscape architecture and urban design show notable regional clusters, but it doesn't feature in terms of dual degrees or joint degrees in the survey. So all of these kind of beginnings of partnerships or collaboration signal a clear shift toward transdisciplinary education, which aligns with core and emerging allied fields. So you can see here in this map some leading institutions where architecture smoothly interact and intersects with allied disciplines. And you can see, of course, many of them are notable institutions. There are key gaps that, or there were key gaps that the survey highlighted. Virtually no programs linking architecture with social sciences or cultural studies, despite the importance of all of us talk about social spatial practices, social sustainability, social dynamics, but very, very minor programs exist to address or to link architecture with social sciences. Technology partnerships, AI, data science, human-computer interactions do not exist, even though design is going digital. Most offerings remain binary, so it's always like architecture plus something. It's that idea of architecture plus is also creating barriers and boundaries. It's not about architecture plus, it's about something that integrates architecture with others. So the complex problems demand basically multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary clusters. So it should not be architecture plus. There are a few degrees that combine design with policy, governance, community development, but that's really very few, and the outcome is that we see graduates unprepared for collaborative decision-making, collective creativity, institution-driven practices, and so on. So basically, there is underrepresentation of social and cultural dimensions. There is technological fields are underexplored. There is a narrow focus of 2-discipline model. So you can see sort of integration. Some institutions are trying to integrate, but it's based on 2 disciplines. And again, this is superficial. One thing I should say, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, everyone in the university system was calling for specialization. They told us, you need to specialize. And then now everybody's calling for otherwise, integration. So the idea of specializations that dominated, and in-depth knowledge that dominated 60s, 70s, and 80s doesn't work anymore with the nature and complexity and diversity of the problems that we witness today. Policy, governance, and community practice are lacking in many architecture schools, even in schools that tries to link architecture with urban design and urban planning. Still, policy and governance are very weak in terms of content and curriculum content. Now, what are the forms of contributions of allied disciplines? We already know, and I think I shouldn't repeat, but we already know that urban design and planning and the notion that Shebnem raised about thinking urban is really important. So we know the contribution of urban design and planning, landscape architecture, civil and construction, structural engineering, and interior architecture, and all other disciplines. It's not limited only to built environment disciplines. We can talk about visual arts, industrial design, digital technologies, environmental design and sustainability, social sciences and cultural studies, many things, in addition to landscape, urban design, and other areas. So basically, these areas, architecture cannot work or solve a problem in isolation from other disciplines. So without going further into these details, I should just show quickly that to bridge architecture with allied disciplines, architecture programs that we find from the survey try to draw on allied fields from history, urban planning, engineering to computer science, but still the integration remains a challenge. And the inputs from other disciplines into core collaborative studios or modules, schools, if we are able to integrate, basically school can broaden the skill set of graduates, foster system based on innovation and creativity, strengthen community engagement. Civic engagement is one of the competencies that a future designer and future architect needs. And all of this, of course, should align with sustainable development goals. So we talk about this. Just to move to the next one. So what are the benefits of collaboration with allied disciplines? So this is a set, these slides try to capture just high level benefits and values of integration in terms of students, educators, and institutions. And of course, by default, will be design professions. So for students, that cultivates broader design thinking skills. Students will be exposed to tools and methods of disciplines that they have no clue about. The landscape thinker, basically, the way they perceive the environment, the way they perceive nature, topography, context, is very different from the way an architect perceives the same set of issues. So simply the multifaceted training prepares graduates for that kind of hybrid careers. So the notion of hybrid career is really very important. We always assume that an architect will go and work in an office, and this is a very outdated perception of the architect. Architects now are working as project managers, as political activists, as many other things beyond being a designer sitting in an office or a draftsman working on Revit or BIM. So these are really very important aspects. Of course, the benefits go on and on in terms of alignment for educators or for institutions, and you can see the list. So I'll conclude here by saying that allied disciplines are no longer optional. It's not an option, really, and it's not a fantasy to collaborate. It's not a luxury to collaborate. We must collaborate. So it's not an option, it's an obligation for architecture education, for education in other fields, and also for design professions. So they are essential collaborators, allied disciplines, in addressing issues related to health, well-being, resilience, global challenges. The survey shows, but it's very shy beginnings. The discipline of architecture is starting to shift from developing or crafting isolated forms to life making, the notion of life making, treating buildings as living systems that support people and communities. Still, significant effort is needed. One, to break down disciplinary silos, and all of us now in this conversation, in this webinar, talk about disciplinary silos. And then two, to try to continue to conceive or reconceive design studios, which were once closed and self-contained learning settings, to transform them into open labs, partnerships strengthened by ongoing feedback. So I'll stop here, and I would thank you very, very much, and I hope that was not too long. So, yes, okay. So now we could go to the questions, the conversations, and now I can see in the question and answer, I promised Peter Auburn that his questions will be the starting point of this conversation, and Peter is raising really two important points about how organizations and how as different professions can work together to achieve what we are talking about. Because also, yes, it can happen at the grassroots level through individual attempts by educators, committed educators, not everybody, committed educators, to integrate with other disciplines. But also this needs to be strengthened by policy, by professional organizations, by organizations that basically project the future of the profession. So if we have comments, you see, Peter, questions and comments, and how do we react to it? Any thoughts?
If I'm Jale, go on.
No,
Please.
Shabnam, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wrote also in the group chat that I think it is very exciting that we, like, four of us coming from different backgrounds, different, places, we are talking about the same thing, basically supporting the same idea from different perspective, both theoretically, idealistically, experientially. Professor Harrington, Jaleh, they presented their experiments, experiences. On the other side, we talked about the ideas behind it. I think that at least makes me feel very happy, because then I realize I'm not alone. I'm not the only one on this island. I'm in Cyprus, away from the mainland, and talking about or thinking about these things in an exciting way, trying to transfer this. And I'm sure some of our audience, maybe you yourself, are doing this, but sometimes you feel alone, because the leaderships have got different problems. The administrators the universities, and then the colleagues, we are all into different duties, etc., etc. So this is very, this is a good feeling. So thanks for organizing this. From this, I would say, I think the local conditions, obviously, not when I say local, within the universities, the university conditions, the academic environments, how they are set up, who are they administrated by, etc. But also the political background, which sets up the um, policy frameworks within the institutions, within the countries, including the accreditation bodies, especially nationwide accreditation bodies. They all have a role. I'm sorry to say that, but at the moment, existingly in many places, as far as I know and I can see, they have a negative role. All these efforts remain very individual, with very, personal efforts, usually not supported by others, by the system itself, by the institutions. But organizations such as this one, and institutions or organizations like UIA, like ISOCARP, like IFLA, or interior architects, all these organizations have got a very important role. This is, I think, I would support, because we come within our institutions, we come together as from different disciplines, we collaborate because we are there. Nobody forces us to be part of these institutions. We can just be in our offices, do our job, go to our, classrooms, studios, do the teaching, come back, write our research papers, do nothing. But if we are in these organizations, that means we want to do things. And this is how we collaborate. And this is how we can come together, force, or do, how to say, it's a korsan, we say it in Turkish. Not, out of the system, like anarchy, we do things in a different way, informally. Okay, maybe that's the right word. Informal teaching, informal studios, informal activities, civic engagement, peer working, joint studios, like I think Jale did that, jumping out of the system. So these are the feelings I've got. Sorry, I'm excited about it. Maybe
No, it's okay.
but I
Okay.
just wanted to share sincerely.
Very good. We'll take Jala and then Salma. Jala, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think Shabnam raised a lot of the issues, the proper reaction to the question. I would like to bring in two things. First of all, we didn't talk about digital tools. And digital tools after COVID, post-COVID, this webinar we're holding is really an incredible, has potential. And talk about institutions and policies. IFLA launched 2 years ago, I think, the Academic and Education and Academic Affairs Directorate within IFLA launched the Global Studio Project. And it's an incredible experience because we have all universities and institutions that have applied to be part of this accredited body participate through different architects, landscape architects, urban designers, come into this global studio. And of course, yes, the digital deprives you of the chance of visiting the site and being immersed in the site. But then there are lectures from each culture. There was from Mexico, there was from Jeddah in Riyadh, about the history, the layers. And so really it's doable and it's incredible, not just cross-disciplinary, but cross-cultural. In this world we inhabit, everything is pulling us apart. So at least something like this brings us together. So the global, I would advise you to look at the IFLA website, the global studio project. The other is within an institution, and I go back to AUB. a degree was called the Interfaculty Graduate Environmental Sciences degree. And what they did, because it was started with agriculture, ecosystem management, engineering, and health sciences. But because they fought as to who will grant the degree, because I think really at the graduate level is the place where such collaborations can really happen. And if we succeed at the graduate level, it will pull the undergraduate. They can participate. So this degree, what was agreed within AUB is that it is under the provost's office, not under any of the faculties. And the courses, there are common courses and independent, and the 4 faculties participating grant a track within this degree. And the tracks, for example, under interfaculty environment is environmental technology under engineering, environmental health under health sciences, ecosystem management under agriculture and food sciences, and environmental policy and planning under the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. So you see, this, I think, is a very successful model, and you can look it up in the AUB web, which has succeeded for many years now. And this is a model that we can follow. Thank you.
Follow. Excellent. Thank you, Salma. Please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. You had a lot of interesting questions and also trying to capture commonalities even to, but I think probably the undertone the question is, how can we use this? And because there is obviously awareness. Yes, there are changes, and Ashraf's survey results will show that there are changes that we are detecting in education. Our allies are, I think, in architecture professional bodies. We are, and the institutions in charge, but the institutions in charge are also bound by legislation, regulation, by the rules that sometimes are either appearing to be rigid or impenetrable or further away. On the other hand, I think the work between educators and professional associations need to be somehow better shared so that we use it as an advocacy, because otherwise we are usually very good in mapping, in understanding trends, in pulling together the information and saying, so this needs to change. But then we create our own or secondary silo of regulating this and sticking to that. But who actually is the user of that? It's the outside world. Or who needs to be convinced in the usability of what we are doing between us and practice. Our interlocutor in UIA is UNESCO, and it's a commission. But then how effective that is, and where does that trickle back? That's another question. But certainly having a condensed and very clear message will help. But it needs to go outside of architecture education and architecture practice managed by professional bodies. It has to go out in an outer world to be relevant and to generate change.
Okay, thank you very much, Salma. Something that comes to mind, really, we are calling now for institutions and professional organizations to support, but at the same time, if you see current trends in talking about decolonization, and why do we have to wait for somebody to tell us what to do? So collectively, you know what I mean? So now if we see individual attempts that are not objected by the institution, that's a good thing. So why don't we keep it that way? That's what I'm trying to say. It's like continue to raise awareness, continue to push the boundaries at an individual level until it becomes a norm. And I think many things in reality happen this way, not initiatives that are generated by the public, which is in this case educators and students. So we have significant number of points, and I'll pick what we can. There is Graham is saying, yes, policy, governance, and community practice. Definitely, these kind of issues don't show in the first professional degree. Definitely. Policy and governance, maybe it's mentioned in one course or another, but it's not fully integrated. Of course, there are bodies of contents in these areas, but I would say it's not fully integrated. Architects, and I'm talking from my perspective, architects graduate without knowing anything about decision making that takes place outside of their own design decision making. That's one of the key things. If one or more know, they will know because they had a professional training in one place, or they were associated with somebody who's training them at somewhere. There is a question about, I think I've seen it, to be an architect had its history as one of the main arts. Developers are managed, this transdisciplinary. Okay, it's not a question, a comment. There is, somebody was raising the point of, I don't see it now, I cannot pick it, but the idea of territorial thinker, not just urban thinker. So going beyond the notion of the city and the idea of the city and going to rural settlements, to desert settlements, to things like that, and see how architecture overlap and work with other disciplines in creating environments for these contexts, not just within cities. I want to say something also. Amel is saying, how does the nature of a university, public or private, shape its ability to foster transdisciplinarity and diversity? If you have, I have my own response, but I will leave it to you. So whether the type of the university make a difference, for example, if we see like American University of Beirut, for example, because it's a private university, it has certain flexibilities within the system that probably you wouldn't find in typical government universities. So would that be a facilitator or a facilitating factor in enabling this? So it's an important point, I think. But as I say, why do we need to go to an institution, whether including professional organizations that exist in countries, to tell us do transdisciplinarity? You know, yes, please, Jana.
I think I agree with you, Ashraf. We aspire to have an institutional guidance and leadership in terms of policy, but it's very difficult. The bureaucracy is almost impossible, and this is why I showed in the case of AUB, I started by bypassing, then gradually they realized the benefits until, there was some kind of integration. It's not ideal because it's landscape and architecture. Engineering should come in, others should come in. But I agree with you, Ashraf. I think it's important to, if we can sort of take stock of the tools and methods, digital, other, and sort of make them available, then institutions can draw on them and take the lead. And I think the paradigm shift will happen, but it will,
Yes.
it will, once people are convinced, you have the outcome. You raised a very interesting talk that you gave, Ashraf. You talked about architects not going to offices. Yes, absolutely. They work with local communities, they're activists, they work with NGOs, local authorities. So the thing is that once society sees the benefits of this transdisciplinary model, institutions will eventually have to accommodate it. So I agree with what you were saying about your approach.
I just recall Buckminster Fuller was saying, if you really want to change a system, you create an alternative system that is successful, that makes the old system obsolete. So it's simply this way. Anyway, so we have Sada Afghan. The session was very informative. Thank you so much, speakers, for sharing their brilliant. How we can maximize the advantages of incorporating latest advancement in technology, such as neuroarchitecture in urban design and community-centric architecture. The floor is open to anyone who want to pick up this.
There are so many questions, so I'm lost in that. I've been trying to read while you're speaking.
Yeah. Basically trying, how do we take advantage from technologies and new themes in neuroarchitecture and urban design and community design?
There is a question, Polina Efimova is asking a question. It's a privilege to be an architect. It had its history as one of the main arts. What do you think about this in future when developments are managing this transdisciplinarity transition faster than architects?
Okay, very, very good
Yes.
point.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say one thing and I'll leave it to you. The history of architecture is not necessarily a true history of things. The history of architecture is the history of the elite. It's the history of palaces, mosques, churches, cathedrals, all of this. But it's the history of rich people. We don't see an actual history of mainstream people. And this is one of the problems, in my view, personal view, with the history of architecture. So the history of the future of this will not be a history of architecture anymore, because architecture now speaks to other segments of society, not just the affluent that used to characterize architecture. So that's my take.
I would say our generation, maybe we are the last generation, maybe one more, but not anymore. We were educated in art, we got the architectural education, believing that architect is the leader, as you were presenting. Architect is the team leader. Whereas with all the things that we have been discussing, things have changed. And maybe that is one of the reasons why constructors or some other people are leading by nature. I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but we need to discuss this. When I studied urban design and when I was more into, and I'm so glad I did, and I'm so glad I have an urban mind, because I believe architecture cannot be done alone. And you have to think all of these things. And this is a big responsibility. That's why in European Union, in the Bologna process, architectures and related disciplines is one of the disciplines which is related with humans, in addition to health sciences and in addition to law. So we are talking about people, we are designing, we are planning for people. And it doesn't matter somehow who is leading the team. We have to work together. One person cannot solve so many problems. And we are not only talking about spatial problems, as we already mentioned, we are talking about many different problems. Each and every project, professional project, is a problem itself, and it is, it's in a big box full of other problems. So one person is not enough. Architect may not be the leader anymore. We may have many leaders depending on the nature of the problem that we are dealing with. I'm not saying one is better than one is, I don't believe in hierarchies anymore. I think depending on the nature of the problem, the local conditions, the problems that we are trying to solve by planning, by design, we should come together. We should involve whoever is necessary, whichever discipline is needed, because each problem that we are dealing with is unique and it has got its own constraints and challenges. So this is why it doesn't matter the managers or constructors taking the lead or they are changing before the architects. Doesn't really matter. I think we shouldn't be competing with each other, but instead we should see ourselves as stakeholders. We are on the same boat and we are just working for the future of the planet. This
Excellent.
is my concern.
Very good. Jana, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have another suggestion to make. I spoke about digital interfaculty degrees. A third example is from a state university, the University of Technology in Baghdad, where I taught. And at one point when they stopped the permission to practice. So to make up, they made a university consultancy office. And that was amazing because as architects, I was then in an architecture department teaching architecture. So as architects, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, mainly engineering, we all practiced in that office and we collaborated across and we had student internship. So in a sense, that was another possibility for this kind of real life because we took projects. So this is again another model that can be introduced, which I think with some success. We all agree that we want, but it's just that we have to look at a range of solutions that fit different contexts, as Shabnam was saying, different institutional, different policy, state, and so on.
Excellent. There is another question, Aisha Gul, about technology in architecture education and drafting a vision. Yes, of course, integrating technology is important. And again, it's a matter of resources and how do you integrate it, and whether also a lot of people now are talking and scholars are talking about technological divide. Basically, those who have access to technology and those who don't have access to technology, what do they do? Technology is not cheap also in certain countries. And if we talk in the context of Africa or South Asia or South America, in certain contexts, you find the School of Architecture with almost no resources. So how do we speak in this context or in these contexts? That's a very important challenge. Okay. Yes, please, Shabnam. You wanted to say something?
Selma has her hand.
Oh, sorry, Salma. Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. I was going to raise Aisha Gul's, but just something that maybe Yala mentioned on the cross-disciplinary work through pooling different disciplines on a concrete project. I think transdisciplinarity also and desire to have it in training of architects is linked very much to the nature of architecture practice. Anglo-Saxon model is a sole practitioner with a team, however big, but it's a monodisciplinary, engaging on a project basis with outside external teams. Therefore, Whereas in maybe situations where you had a more, how would I put it, public sector type of organizations, they don't have to be government, but multidisciplinary, which is a tradition in parts of maybe Southeastern Europe, Greece, etc., where it was quite typical that the practice that is engaging in design work has architects, engineers of all profiles working together in the same office on a project. So, we have to go back to understanding why was that good for certain periods of architecture that materialized, and the urban developments indeed, in the maybe this period of post World War II. So that is probably something that is ignored or overlooked in understanding the education. And secondly, yes, I agree with flexibility, and kind of there is an independence or perceived independence of education to deliver whatever there is. But there is also outside world where these young people need to enter into employment. So in the sort of, if you want, global distribution of work among professions, we would need to support the clarity of the profile that comes out of the university and enters into that market. We would, whatever that may be, it may change. It may be a problem solver and systems thinker with environmental cloak, but we need to help architect and indeed related discipline, giving kind of a clear message, or having a clear identity in the real world of what is this person able to do. It's always debated, is it the role of the university or not, or third level education to make somebody fit for practice. But particularly, I think in smaller countries, that is an important aspect not to overlook.
Sure. Yes, please.
There are a couple of similar questions. One was from Wafa. She's from Isocarp. She's asking, how can architecture education be redesigned to foster collaboration across disciplines? And what skills and mindsets should architecture graduates develop to engage meaningfully complex urban challenges? And this was similar to Peter's concern. And I would say the way to do it is basically transferring or sharing the topics, theories, methodologies, processes of one discipline to the other through the learning environments. And that needs innovative teaching and learning models. We have to, as educators, we have to refresh ourselves. We cannot rely on our old methods of teaching. We have to be innovative in that sense. And that also needs individual visions and individual efforts and or visionary leadership. If you are lucky in your institutions, and if your leader, your head of department, dean, whoever is leading the school has a vision, okay, let's do that. Let's just, redesign our curriculum. You may call it a top-down approach, but okay, that's a vision. This is needed. But if you don't have that, if you're not lucky, and if you're doing it like individuals, a couple of colleagues coming together trying to force, okay, this is a bottom-up approach. Then you do it, you force it, you do it your own way, you find ways, just like Jale did, and still do it. We cannot escape. We have to redesign the way that our curriculums And accreditation processes actually allows these. Sometimes they are seen in a negative way, that, okay, we have got a validation, we have got accreditation, we cannot change things. No, it is not the case. It is not the core of any kind of quality assurance system. You know, quality assurance systems requires you to develop, to change, to adapt yourself to the changing conditions. We cannot say that we are not going to use AI or technology. It's impossible. So we really need to be open to changes institutionally, individually, administratively, and community-wise. That will be, I hope, a contribution to the questions.
Very good. Jala, please.
I wanted to respond or really bring up a question by Hannah Alamuddin attending. She says, what about the building regulations that can be used to demand a certain performance level, which is very important because it connects to what Ashraf said. We're going in architecture from product to process, focus on process, which is something that is essential in landscape, which I came across in landscape really. But what Hannah is raising, it's very interesting because, in a sense, the global crisis, ecological crisis, environmental crisis, becomes, in a way, a platform or an umbrella for the collaboration. Because, again, you know, you cannot work on these without collaborating with mechanical engineers, with architects, with landscape architects, in climatology, to look at all of those policymakers. So in a sense, these performance standards can help bring disciplines together. And another aspect is that it gives a credible justification to the institution, because again, you have to justify what you're doing. So the more cards you have stacked up in your favor, the more likely it is that, again, from department and faculty and university level, you can. So again, so thank you, Hannah, for raising this.
Thank you. We have a number of, basically it's 3:10 now, European time. It's 2:10 UK time. So we could give 10 more minutes and try to close if we can. So we can pick the most important points if we feel there is a point Dr. Abir Ilham is raising, and I want to react to this about did you study in your survey how many schools are willing to change into transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary because the Bauhaus modern established ego of the architect persists? Yes, the industry still celebrates such architecture and architects, especially in the Middle East. What you mentioned in the presentation today seems to be utopian schemes. Okay. Very, very important question. I would say it's not utopian, Dr. Abir, for a number of reasons. I'm talking globally, of course. One of the problems is that problems circulates around the world. So what were problems in the 70s and 80s, say in North America and Europe, were not problems at the time in the Middle East or South America, South Asia. Now the problem is moving of star architects that was here and now is diminishing, I should say, although diminishing slightly. Still the problem circulated and is now rising in the Middle East. I should say that no, the survey did not address the willingness to change, but the survey shows that there are hundreds of people are working on the idea of authentic learning, the idea of how to engage with civic organizations, how to engage with communities, how to collaborate and make decisions. So that studio model of whether design build, we call it life projects or community design, is gaining momentum. It was not mainstream at all 20 years ago. Now it's gaining momentum. At least when you talk to a mainstream architect, they will understand what you talk about and the importance of it, even if they don't like it or they don't like to do it. So I think, of course, they are aspirationals. I wouldn't say utopians, but I would say aspiration. Basically, we aspire to have more of that. Still, yes, all of the current changes and the current developments did not manage to penetrate the thick skin of architecture education. Architecture education still have a very, very thick skin, and it's not easy really to penetrate. But as we say, the individual attempts are promising. So. Okay, if you pick any points, I can see a point about EAAE and whether we are engaged with them. And maybe Selma could pick up on this a bit, and I can.
Yes, I have. Yes, and thank you. I think it's Utah Carson that sent it, and thank you very much. I just again, that this is bringing us a European perspective, because I suppose it helps and complicates the life of a European architect that we work within this EU regulatory framework. But I think as a response, there is a good work and good collaboration between European Association of Architectural Educators and Architects Council of Europe, which brings together national national institutes and chambers of architecture. So that we have a good platform developed in years of existence of each organization to thrash out the issues that are impacting the standards in education and the changing needs of practice and environmental and so on. So I mean, even though and so we have leads to this website, to the recent EU Miss Award that kind of awards young practices, which gives a snapshot of what type of work is available there, what type of work gets delivered and then applied for the awards. And the EU is, with different initiatives and different funding schemes, trying to foster this transdisciplinarity. I mentioned very briefly New European Bauhaus and many others. So through funding schemes that are available, there is an attempt to support also grassroots initiatives, small scale, projects, neighborhood-based projects. We sometimes think of this, and maybe it was even mentioned, community-based architect. Who is that? What profile is that? But also that person has to live and earn a living. So we mustn't forget that. How do we equip these people who are all willing to be transdisciplinary, who are already transgressing different boundaries? How do we equip them as educators to be able to earn a living? And how do we make clear what type of, there is a new EU taxonomy which looks into nomenclature of professions and so on, of work areas. So that is also a reality that it's the architects, yes, the way traditional architecture was taught and development from elite to, as Ashraf was mentioned, from elite to now too many architects, so you cannot be elite. The dynamics of development in architecture, a building, once it's built, it'll take 50, 100 and more years unless we live in a kind of in a war zone or in developers heaven. Those projects stay. So the cyclical nature of work available forces architects and related disciplines to work differently and assume different roles in the span of their career and at different places. That is the fact. So I am looking at the question by Henry Kirungi, who is an architecture student at International University of East Africa in Uganda. And he's also saying, he's talking about ranking of courses, but also he's saying, well, does this notion of cross-disciplinary redefine what architect is in the 21st century? So that is, I think, what this commission is trying to contribute to through this triennial work in the UIA. We cannot probably give too many answers today. We have maybe raised more questions, and we have put the tables out displaying our goods, so to speak, displaying our craft and or experience, to say, okay, this is what I know about this and how that matches what you have displayed and so on. So maybe we will be closer to this definition of what is the architect of 21st century Henry once the work of this commission is nearing the end, and maybe at the next Congress, when the Charter of Education might reflect the current thinking, as these webinars are trying to reveal, accompanied with surveys and etc., etc. So I hope that's like, we can't change things overnight, but we can be inspired by each other, which is the main thing, supported by each other, and then go back to our place of work and engagement, and continue in the same way, in the knowledge that we are not alone. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, excellent, Salma. Thank you very much. I just want to add one simple point about the nature of the organizations, because the nature of the organizations and the context in which they work mandates a specific type of thinking. So, for example, in contexts where the architecture profession is and other professions, landscape, urban design is always an issue in terms when it comes to being a profession. But let's say urban planning, architecture, landscape. In Europe, for example, they have established traditions. Now, our job, seriously, is to start to look at these issues and how they manifest in Africa, how they manifest in Southeast Asia, because we don't want to end up with a European perspective that speaks to the entire world. We had enough of that over the past 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, 700 years. So I think it is about time that voices and contexts coming from Africa, South Asia, South America, the global South, basically, and how architecture education manifests in these countries, and how collaboration could take place in these very difficult contexts in terms of resources, in terms of whatever settings, institutional boundaries, and all of these aspects. So I think that point is very, very important, especially that ISOCARP, IFLA, UIA are international organizations, are not regional organizations, I would say. So probably many would disagree on this, but that's okay.
I wouldn't disagree. I would agree.
Okay. So yes, I think. Do you want to say something, Jala? Salma?
Maybe our last words,
Yes, why don't you say, conclude with a word that you want to say? So start with Shabnam.
Okay. I always, I never forget this phrase that it was, I think, about 10 years ago or maybe less. that the NAAB director, when we invited him to an architectural education conference, unspoken issues to our faculty, he said that we are educating students for or architects for an unknown future, and I strongly believe that. Therefore, as educators, as professionals, we should always be open-minded. We should be dreaming. We should be learning about all the global, or being aware of all the global issues, but trying to solve our local problems at the same time. And that really needs collaboration, communication, and co-working together, just like this. Doesn't matter anymore with the technology where we are located, and that's a luck, and that's an advantage, and we need to take this advantage and to keep going. Thank you for organizing this event, and thanks for inviting me and ISOCARP to that.
Thank you, Shabnam. Jala, please.
Yeah. I'll start by thanking you for organizing this very interesting webinar and for inviting IFLA. What I wanted to reflect on is really architecture. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, especially in the global south, architecture is about building, and architecture creativity is about different forms. It's formal, it's superficial. Architecture is not, as we all agree, about buildings. Architecture is really an incredible ability of looking at components, putting them together to fulfill a specific aim. And when you have this very broad definition of architecture, I really think we have to look at the definition of architecture. I speak because I trained as an architect, and I moved to landscape because I found in it a freeing of constraints, and I loved it, and I've learned, and I learn every day from landscape architecture. But without my architecture background, yes, maybe I wouldn't have appreciated landscape architecture as much. But what I'm trying to say is that architecture is incredible, but we really need to revisit, to continue what Shabnam was saying. What is architecture in this changing world we inhabit? Let's go back to the basics and the amazing creativity of design, of lateral thinking, of problematics, and being prescriptive and not just descriptive. And this is really what we as designers bring into the world. We give solutions, whereas others will look, analyze, and make incredible policies. But to come up with solutions, you need the creativity of design. So I really think I would, speaking as an architect, not as IFLA, I would really suggest we also look at the definition of what architecture is in the 21st century. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Salma, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I can only really agree and maybe just use slightly different words, because that is something that I've experienced, and it's like all of us are architects, so our training arose. When Leonardo da Vinci was alive, he was an engineer, a painter, an architect. So he designed infrastructure. So this Homo Universalis now, of course, it's impossible. The things have become. So we have kind of embedded this universalism in the training, and it serves us good, but it perhaps confuses others. So I think I like the idea to reiterate, we adapt. We are a very adaptable profession, but we might be called different names, and what we don't like at them, we are not called when we should be called. So I think we can offer and instill matrix thinking, as Yala you're mentioning it. Matrix thinking, that is the essence of mapping elements for design. articulating those through design and problem solving through design. So we are matrix thinkers and problem solvers / architects / whatever else specialisms. Secondly, you know, there might be from a legal point of view, from point of view of practicing, from insurance, etc., etc. It might be an idea to kind of see in terms of Bologna in education or other breakdowns of, you know, paths to become architect and other. It might be an idea to be more concrete, more specific about what is the core, what is the specialism, and at what level, what is undergraduate, what is postgraduate, and then what do you call yourself? Because we have a real situation that in Europe you have a protection of title or not in different jurisdictions. So that is at issue, and we cannot ignore that even when we are promising students what type of knowledge and what type of engagement they can expect. So it's the balance between this enthusiasm that we keep alive and which is fantastic for our profession and survival skills through our profession. But we need to kind of be, you know, harder on, as maybe Shebnem is saying, you know, kind of, we need to be hard as well and very precise and technical if necessary to define what is it that we bring to the table? What is it that I can do from, you know, designing somebody's shed to thinking about, you know, flood damage mediation, etc., etc.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Selma. I just want to, I'll say my word, and it's not really capturing the entire thing, the entire conversation, but I just want to say that in our first webinar, we had Tom Fisher. Tom Fisher is a professor of architecture, University of Minnesota, and was the dean of the School of Architecture for about 15, 20 years. And now he's in charge of a design center within the university. Tom Fisher, in the first presentation, was talking about the idea, the rise of the solution architect, and was talking about that architects should facilitate, now their role is to facilitate solutions, work with communities and with other disciplines, not necessarily to articulate the solution, but to facilitate it. And then somebody else can do it, whatever professional organizations or a professional architect. So that's one, I think, one important point. There will be diversity of roles, and we should not assume that everybody's graduating is a designer, is a designer in a traditional sense. Unfortunately, architecture education in many parts of the world still speaks this language. Everybody's a designer, and design studios, like professional organizations say, should be more than 50% of the curriculum. So why, and all of this is subject to further discussion. And I have to say thank you so much, Jala, for an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Shebnem, for an excellent presentation. Thank you, Selma, for bearing with me and being late and doing a lot of things. And of course, for your excellent presentation.
And we thank you as well.
And we thank you.
Not at all. Thank you very much. And we hope to have another one in the future.
Yes, thank you very much. And greetings to our silent listeners, but I hope we captured and it was great to have such a huge attendance and a live interest demonstrated through questions in the chat. So I think it's important for presenters as well to see that.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Yeah, bye.